There's a kid who grows up in a middle-class family in Montreal, public school, subsidized CGIP, then a heavily subsidized engineering degree at McGill or University of Toronto. The tuition? Maybe $10,000 a year, 15 at most. The real cost? Closer to $50,000 or $60,000 per year when you factor in faculty salaries, research facilities, libraries, labs, and infrastructure. Canadian taxpayers cover the difference. By the time this kid graduates with a computer science or software engineering degree, the state has quietly invested somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 into this one human being. Through schools, healthcare, infrastructure, grants, the university system. That's the deal. Society invests in you. You stay, you work, you pay taxes, you build companies, you hire people. The investment pays back over 40 years. Now fast forward 5 years. That engineer is not in Montreal, not in Toronto, not anywhere in Canada. They're in Seattle, San Francisco, Austin. Working for Amazon, Google, Meta, or some venture-backed startup you've never heard of. Paying US, federal, and state taxes, building products and intellectual property that accrue to American companies, buying a house in Bellevue or Palo Alto, having kids who will go to American schools. For the Canadian taxpayer, the equation is brutal. We paid for the seed, the soil, the water, the greenhouse. The fruit grows somewhere else, and we don't even get a thank you note. This is not a story about one person. It's a pattern, a system, a quiet hemorrhage that's been bleeding Canada dry for decades. The numbers are staggering. 2/3 of recent software engineering graduates from Canada's top universities are now working in the United States. Not 20%, not 30%, 2/3. University of Waterloo, one of the best computer science programs in the world, sees 70% of some graduating classes accept offers south of the border. The people Canada spent decades and hundreds of thousands of dollars per person training are building Amazon Web Services, training Google's AI models, and writing code for Tesla's self-driving cars. Canada is not alone. France funds one of the world's deepest public education and engineering systems. French engineers are so respected in Silicon Valley that American firms joke they cost 1/3 of a local hire for the same skill level. Italy pays for schooling and university in a country facing a demographic winter, while hundreds of thousands of young Italians have left since 2008 searching for wages that don't insult them. The United States doesn't pay to raise these people, doesn't pay to educate them, doesn't pay for their health care while they're studying. It just harvests the finished product at peak productivity, right when they're about to start paying serious taxes and building serious companies. This is the Nursery Nation problem. Countries that invest heavily in human capital then lose their best graduates to richer, more dynamic markets. The result is a human capital hemorrhage. And if you live in Canada, surrounded by talk of brain drain, stagnant wages, and a real estate trap that makes home ownership impossible, this is not an academic issue. It's the reason your country is slowly becoming a high-quality farm system for American capitalism. Welcome to the Nursery Nation trap. 1. The free gift. Nobody talks about how human capital actually works. Let's start with the economics. Human capital is the skills, knowledge, and experience embodied in people. But here's what economists always forget to mention. Human capital is expensive as hell to build. Think about what it actually takes to create a senior software engineer, a top-tier doctor, or a cutting-edge AI researcher. 18 years of childhood, public school from kindergarten through grade 12, healthcare, vaccinations, roads, libraries, sports programs, all funded by taxpayers. Then 4 to 5 years of university, labs, professors with PhDs, research equipment, campus infrastructure, dormitories, security, IT systems. In countries like Canada and France, the state pays the vast majority of this cost. Even when students pay tuition, they're covering maybe 20 to 30% of the real expense. Then often another 2 to 4 years of graduate school or specialized training, master's degrees, PhDs, medical residencies, engineering boot camps, more taxpayer money, more subsidized research. By the time someone walks across a stage with a degree in machine learning or electrical engineering, the public has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars. In some cases, close to $500,000 when you add it all up. From a national accounting perspective, each highly trained worker is a multi-$100,000 asset. But here's the problem. Human capital comes with legs. When a country invests in a bridge, the bridge doesn't wake up one morning and move to Austin, Texas. When a country invests in a person, that person can. And if wages are higher elsewhere, housing is more accessible elsewhere, tech ecosystems are deeper elsewhere, and taxes are lighter elsewhere, then a rational person leaves. That's basic economics. The twist is when you systematically train people at public expense for the benefit of other countries' tax authorities. When your best graduates build companies, pay income taxes, and raise families under someone else's flag. At that point, you're not a country anymore. You're a nursery. You're raising talent for export. And the returns on your investment accrue to someone else's economy. 2. Canada's quiet exodus. 2/3 of your best engineers just left. Let's talk about Canada specifically, because the numbers are worse than most Canadians realize. Canada markets itself as a talent magnet, an attractive destination for skilled immigrants, a rising tech hub with Shopify, OpenText, and a growing AI cluster. Some of that is true. But underneath the marketing, Canada has a massive retention problem. Multiple studies paint the same picture. One analysis of Canadian STEM graduates from top universities found that Canada lost 2/3 of recent software engineering graduates to the United States. Not 10%, not a quarter, 2/3. About 1/3 of computer engineering and computer science graduates were working south of the border within a few years of graduation. The United States is the main destination, and the biggest beneficiaries are large American multinationals: Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, Apple. Another study found that roughly 10% of all STEM graduates in Canada end up working in the US. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize it's concentrated in the highest value fields. An unofficial count of a recent University of Waterloo software engineering class suggested 70% had accepted offers in the United States. 70%. That's not brain drain, that's a brain evacuation. Back in 2018, the BBC reported that over 65% of software engineering students were leaving Canada, drawn by pay that was up to 30% higher and the chance to work at the biggest, most prestigious tech firms in the world. And it's not just Canadian-born students. Canada also loses immigrants it already attracted. One detailed report found that about 1 in 5 immigrants leave Canada within 25 years of landing, with departure rates peaking in the first 5 years. Highly educated immigrants leave at twice the rate of lower-skilled workers. Why? Because they come expecting opportunity. They find credential barriers. Canadian experience, requirements that keep engineers driving Ubers and doctors working retail, underemployment, wage stagnation, and housing costs that make Toronto and Vancouver feel like punishment for succeeding. So they do what any rational person does. They take their skills to a market that will actually pay for them. Canada is pulling in talent from abroad, training domestic talent at public expense, and then leaking both to the United States at astonishing rates. This is the Nursery Nation dynamic in its purest form. You do the expensive part. Raise them, educate them, keep them healthy. Then watch them leave right when the payoff is supposed to start. Let me know in the comments. Are you a Canadian STEM grad? Did you leave for the US, or are you thinking about it? What's stopping you? Or what made you go? August 3. Why they leave. Pancake wages meet the housing apocalypse. So why do they leave? It's not about healthcare. It's not about safety. It's not about quality of life in some abstract sense. It's about money. And more specifically, it's about the math of trying to build a life in Canada versus the math of building a life in the United States. Let's start with wages. A software engineer graduating from Waterloo or UBC can expect a starting salary in Canada of maybe 80 to 110,000 Canadian dollars. Sounds decent, until you compare it to the United States. That same engineer, with the same degree from the same program, can get offers in the US ranging from 150 to 220,000 US dollars. Total compensation. Salary plus stock options, plus signing bonuses. That's not a 10% difference. That's not even a 30% difference. When you factor in exchange rates and tax differences, it's often double, sometimes more. Over a career, that gap compounds into millions of dollars. Millions. And before you say, but cost of living, let's talk about housing. Toronto. The average home price peaked above $1 million. Vancouver? Even worse. 1.2 million, 1.5 million in some neighborhoods for a regular house. Not a mansion, not waterfront. A 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. Meanwhile, salaries in those cities are often lower than equivalent US cities once you adjust for currency. So you have engineers making 80,000 Canadian dollars, which is about 58,000 US dollars after exchange rates, trying to buy $1 million homes in cities where even condos cost 700,000. The math doesn't work. Even if you save aggressively, even if you get help from parents, you're looking at a 30-year mortgage that consumes half your take-home pay. Now compare that to someone making 180,000 US dollars in Seattle or Austin. Yes, Seattle is expensive, but the ratio of income to housing cost is far more favorable. And in places like Austin or Denver, you can actually buy a house in your 30s without selling a kidney. The mortgage payment is a smaller share of your income. You're not house poor. You're not trapped. This is what I call the Smikodization effect. Wages in Canada have gone flat like a pancake, especially for young, skilled workers, while housing prices have gone vertical. The spread between what you earn and what you need to live a middle-class life has widened into a canyon. And on the other side of that canyon is a bridge called an H-1B visa. So people cross it, not because they hate Canada, but because staying feels like economic self-harm. And it's not just wages and housing, it's career trajectory. In the United States, if you're good, you can jump from a startup to a big tech company to another startup and double your compensation in 5 years. In Canada, promotions are slower, teams are smaller, budgets are tighter, the ceiling is lower, you hit it faster, and then you're stuck. Unless you leave. Well, 4. The great capital suck. Why Canadian money chases condos, not companies? But why can't Canada just pay more? Why can't Canadian tech companies compete with American offers? The answer is the great capital suck. This connects directly to your previous videos on the real estate trap and Japanification. In Canada, and to a similar extent in parts of Europe, decades of policy and culture have funneled capital into the wrong places. Think about where money goes in Canada. Households treat housing as their primary investment vehicle. Banks love mortgage lending because it's seen as safe, backed by property. Governments rely on land transfer taxes, development fees, and construction booms to juice GDP numbers. Pension funds and institutional investors load up on Canadian real estate and infrastructure. The entire system is designed to push savings into existing assets, not into risky new ventures. The result? Venture capital in Canada is a fraction of what it is in the United States, even adjusted for population. Canadian startups struggle to raise Series A and Series B funding at reasonable valuations. Many that do succeed end up getting acquired by American firms or flipping their incorporation to Delaware and moving headquarters south to access deeper capital markets. For a young engineer or entrepreneur, this means limited options. You can join one of the few big Canadian tech companies, Shopify, maybe a bank's innovation lab, or you can join a scrappy startup that's probably going to run out of runway or get bought by an American competitor. Or you can just skip the drama and go straight to Google, where the stock options alone can make you a millionaire if the company does well. The great capital suck doesn't just depress wages, it starves the ecosystem. Without deep venture funding, you can't build the next generation of globally competitive companies. Without globally competitive companies, you can't offer globally competitive compensation. Without globally competitive compensation, your best people leave. And without your best people, your startups can't compete. It's a doom loop. And here's the kicker. The money exists. Canada is not a poor country. Canadians have massive amounts of savings. But those savings are trapped in real estate, GICs, bonds, and conservative portfolios. The risk-tolerant early-stage capital that nourishes new companies is comparatively tiny. So Canadian engineers build the future, just not in Canada. 5. France and Italy. When the nursery becomes a retirement home, Canada is not alone. France and Italy are playing the same game, just with different accents. France has one of the world's most impressive education systems. Elite engineering schools, grandes écoles, deep traditions in mathematics, physics, and computer science. And public funding keeps tuition low. French engineers are highly respected globally. Silicon Valley recruiters love them. Why? Because they're well-trained and comparatively cheap. One founder quoted in French media joked that a French engineer costs about 1/3 of a Silicon Valley engineer for the same skill level. That's great for American companies, terrible for France, because it means France is subsidizing American tech giants' labor costs. French taxpayers fund the education. American shareholders capture the returns. The brain drain is visible. A decade ago, French President François Hollande openly worried about the exodus of French entrepreneurs and engineers to Silicon Valley. More recently, French media reported an inexorable flight of French AI specialists to the United States. The reasons are the same as Canada: precarious research contracts at home, the dominance of American tech giants in AI, much higher pay and resources across the Atlantic. France has tried to respond. French tech hubs, incentives to lure expats back, R&D tax breaks to attract labs from global firms. Some of it works, but the underlying problem remains. Wages for young engineers in France are a fraction of what they'd earn in the US. Housing in Paris is nearly as bad as Toronto or Vancouver. And the startup ecosystem, while improving, still can't match the scale, speed, or capital depth of Silicon Valley or even Austin. Italy's situation is even more dire. Italy is facing a demographic winter. Fewer than 400,000 births in 2023, 1 in 4 residents over 65. The working age population is projected to shrink by 27% over the next 30 years. That's catastrophic. At the same time, young Italians are fleeing. Between 2008 and 2022, about 525,000 young people left Italy, not for vacations, permanently. Surveys show that 35% of Italians under 30 are ready to move abroad for higher wages and better job prospects. 85% have seriously considered leaving their home region. The governor of the Bank of Italy called this exodus a gigantic social and economic upheaval. And he's right, because many of those leaving are the most educated, the most ambitious, the most productive. The exact people Italy needs to support an aging population and restart growth. Italy educates these young people in public schools and universities. Then they leave, often to Northern Europe, the UK, or the United States. Italian taxpayers lose the education investment, the future tax payments, and the demographic balance. Italy becomes a nursery inside a retirement home, training the young to support someone else's economy while its own population ages into irrelevance. Quick poll. If you're European or know someone who left Europe for North America, what was the main reason? Higher pay, better housing, career opportunities? Drop your answer below. 6. Why the United States wins without even trying. So why does all this talent flow to the United States? What makes the US the gravitational center of this entire system? 3 things: scale, capital, network effects. First, scale. The United States offers a massive single market with relatively unified rules, a common language, and deep corporate demand for tech and high-skilled labor. For an ambitious engineer or founder, that means bigger teams, bigger budgets, bigger opportunities. A startup in San Francisco can realistically aim to serve 330 million Americans from day one. A startup in Toronto is thinking about 40 million Canadians, many of whom are spread across a massive geography with fragmented markets. Scale means you can pay more, because the addressable market is bigger, the revenue potential is bigger, the exit multiples are bigger, everything compounds. Second, capital. U.S. capital markets are uniquely liquid, risk-tolerant, and experienced at funding loss-making, high-growth companies. Venture capital in the United States dwarfs the rest of the world combined. For a young AI researcher or fintech founder, that means it's easier to raise a Series A, Series B, Series C in San Francisco or New York than in Paris, Milan, or Toronto. Valuations are higher, making equity compensation more valuable. Exit paths through IPOs or acquisitions by big tech firms are clearer and more frequent. And third, network effects. Every year, more global talent arrives in Silicon Valley, New York, Austin, Boston. French engineers, Canadian AI researchers, Italian designers, Indian coders, Chinese hardware experts, Israeli cybersecurity specialists. Once those clusters exist, they become self-reinforcing. The best want to work with the best. If you're serious about being at the absolute cutting edge of your field, you feel like you're missing out if you're not there. French media captured this perfectly with a quote from an AI researcher. If you're not over there, you're out of the game. That sentiment is lethal for Nursery Nations, because it means even if wages improve at home, even if housing gets more affordable, even if local ecosystems get better, many top performers will still feel the pull. They'll still want to spend crucial career years where the action is. The United States doesn't build this system through malice or grand strategy. It's emergent. But the result is a human capital empire powered by other countries' education budgets. France, Canada, Italy, and others do the expensive part, raising people from birth to age 25, educating them, keeping them healthy, and the US selectively harvests the finished product at peak productivity. It's brilliant for the US. It's a slow-motion disaster for everyone else. 7. The fiscal black hole. What happens when your best taxpayers leave? Let's talk about what this actually costs. Not in abstract terms, in dollars and cents. Every engineer, doctor, or researcher who leaves Canada or France represents a massive fiscal loss. Think about the math. A software engineer making $150,000 a year in California pays roughly $40,000 to $50,000 per year in combined federal and state income taxes. Over a 40-year career, that's $1.6 to $2 million in tax revenue, plus sales taxes, property taxes, capital gains taxes if their stock options pay off. Now imagine that same person had stayed in Canada. They'd be paying Canadian federal and provincial income taxes, buying a house and paying property taxes to a Canadian municipality, spending money in the Canadian economy, maybe founding a company that hires dozens or hundreds of other Canadians. The lifetime fiscal contribution could easily be $3 to $5 million when you add it all up. Multiply that by 2/3 of a graduating class from Waterloo, or by the hundreds of thousands of young Italians who've left since 2008, or by the steady stream of French engineers heading to California. The numbers get terrifying fast. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars in lost tax revenue over a generation, maybe hundreds of billions when you include the companies that never get started, the jobs that never get created, the innovations that never happen. And here's what makes it worse. The people who leave are disproportionately the highest earners, the top 10 or 20% of the income distribution. These are the people who, in a progressive tax system, carry a huge share of the load. When they leave, the tax burden shifts onto everyone else, or services get cut, or debt goes up. It's a fiscal black hole that gets bigger every year. At the same time, Canada and France and Italy still have to pay for pensions and healthcare for aging populations, still have to maintain infrastructure, still have to fund universities to train the next cohort of people who will also leave. It's a Ponzi scheme in reverse. You pay in, others collect, and the system slowly goes broke. 8. The pension time bomb. Your retirement is betting on people who already left. Here's a connection most people miss. The brain drain doesn't just hurt the government budget, it destroys your retirement. Because pension systems are built on a simple assumption, current workers pay for current retirees. And there are always more workers coming up behind you to pay for you when it's your turn. But what happens when the best workers leave? When the highest earners who would have paid the most into the system spend their careers paying into the US Social Security system instead of the Canada Pension Plan? The math breaks. The ratio of workers to retirees worsens, the tax base shrinks, and either contributions go up, benefits go down, or the government prints money to cover the gap. Canada's CPP holds over $500 billion in assets. A huge chunk of that is invested in Canadian equities and infrastructure. If Canada's economy stagnates because it can't retain talent, those investments underperform. If the tax base shrinks because high earners emigrate, CPP faces funding pressure. The same logic applies to provincial pensions, private RRSPs, and TFSAs loaded with Canadian assets. The brain drain isn't just about jobs today. It's about whether there's enough money in the system to pay you when you're 75. And right now, the answer is looking shaky. Because the people who were supposed to be funding your retirement are currently living in Seattle, paying into a different system, building wealth that will never return to Canada. This is the Nursery Nation trap at its most personal. You paid taxes your whole life expecting a social contract. The government invests in the next generation works and pays taxes, the cycle continues. But if the next generation leaves, the cycle breaks, and you're left holding a promise written on paper that nobody has the money to keep. 9. Can Nursery Nations grow up? 5 things that might actually work. So, can this be fixed? Can countries like Canada stop being nurseries and start retaining their own talent? Maybe, but it requires choices that are politically brutal and economically uncomfortable. Here are 5 things that might actually work. First, admit the problem exists and measure it honestly. Right now, many governments downplay brain drain. Statistics Canada has put out reports suggesting the overall flow to the US is more like a trickle. Meanwhile, targeted studies show 2/3 of software engineers leaving. Both can be technically true if you include everyone, but if you lose most of your highest value workers in strategic fields, the net effect is catastrophic. You can't fix what you refuse to measure. Track high-skilled immigration by field and cohort. Publish the data. Admit where you're bleeding talent. Second, let wages and careers adjust in key sectors. If you systematically suppress wages in tech, engineering, medicine, and research, while allowing real estate investors and finance to capture outsized gains, you are designing a brain drain. Reduce the distortions that funnel too much capital into housing. Encourage compensation structures that let high-skilled workers share in the value they create. Reform labor rules where they block performance-based progression without actually protecting job security. You don't need to copy American-style ruthlessness, but you can't pay people half and expect them to stay out of loyalty. Third, fix housing before it's too late. Housing is not just a social issue, it's a talent retention issue. If a 30-year-old engineer or doctor cannot afford to buy a modest home in a major city without extreme financial stress, they will leave for a market where they can. Build more housing where people actually want to live. Tackle zoning, permitting, and speculation. Align immigration targets with housing capacity. Every extra year someone spends trapped in a rental they can't escape increases the appeal of immigration. Fourth, aim capital at productive risk, not just safe bets. If you want founders to stay, you need to make it possible to raise early-stage capital at home without getting crushed on valuation or terms. Support scale-up funding, so companies don't have to flip to U.S. ownership at Series B. Reduce the bias in banking and pension allocation that treats a condo loan as safer than a factory or a research lab. That might mean public co-investment schemes. It might mean pension funds allocating more to domestic ventures. It might mean tax incentives aimed at real innovation. Fifth, use the diaspora deliberately, not accidentally. Some brain drain can become brain circulation if you're smart. Map where your people are. Build programs to connect them with domestic firms, universities, and investors. Make it easy for them to invest, mentor, or return without bureaucratic punishment. But this only works if the base conditions at home are not hostile. Otherwise, you're just asking people to send postcards from a better life. Well, team, what do you think? Can Canada actually do any of these 5 things? Or is the political system too captured by homeowners, banks, and short-term thinking to allow real change? Let me know below. 10. The education trap. Why free university might be making it worse. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Free or heavily subsidized university might actually be making the brain drain worse. Not because education is bad, but because it creates a system where the public pays for training that primarily benefits private actors in other countries. Think about the incentives. In Canada, domestic students pay relatively low tuition. The government covers most of the cost. The individual gets a valuable degree for a fraction of its real price. That's great for access and equity. But it also means the individual has very little personal financial stake in staying in Canada after graduation. Compare that to the United States. American students often graduate with $50,000, $80,000, even $150,000 in student debt. That debt is brutal. It's a trap. But it also creates a financial tie to the U.S. job market. If you're an American with $90,000 in loans, you can't easily move to a country where salaries are lower. You're locked in. You have to stay and work in the high-wage U.S. market to pay off the debt. Canadian students graduate with little or no debt. They're free, mobile, unencumbered, which means they're free to follow the highest wage offer wherever it leads. And if that offer is in Seattle for double what they'd make in Toronto, there's nothing holding them back. No debt anchor, no financial penalty for leaving. The Canadian taxpayer funded their freedom to emigrate. This is the education trap. The more generous your public education system, the easier you make it for your best graduates to leave. You've removed the financial friction that might have kept them home. You've turned your university system into a free launching pad for American tech companies. I'm not saying Canada should adopt American-style student debt. That system is cruel and inefficient. But there's a middle ground. Countries like Australia have income contingent loans that you only pay back if you stay and earn above a certain threshold. If you leave, you still owe the money. That creates a financial incentive to stay without crushing people with debt they can't afford. The point is this: if you're going to invest hundreds of thousands of public dollars per person, you need some mechanism to capture a return on that investment. Otherwise, you're just running a charity for Silicon Valley's HR department. 11. The ghost of Canada future. What happens in 20 years? Let's fast forward. The year is 2045. You're walking through a neighborhood in Toronto, or Vancouver, or Montreal. The houses look nice, well maintained. The streets are clean. Public services still function. On paper, Canada is still a rich country. High GDP per capita. Good rankings on quality of life indices. But something feels wrong. The energy is gone. The average age is 55. The schools are half empty because there aren't enough kids. The tech sector that was supposed to be Canada's future, mostly acquired by American firms or relocated south. The few Canadian success stories that remain are exceptions that prove the rule. The young people who stayed are the ones who couldn't leave, the ones without the skills or credentials to get U.S. work visas, the ones tied down by family obligations or risk aversion. The ambitious, the brilliant, the hungry. They left decades ago. They're running companies in Austin, leading research labs at Stanford, raising families in suburbs of Seattle where their kids will grow up American. Canada has become a well-run retirement community with a world-class education system that trains workers for export. It's stable, polite, orderly, and utterly irrelevant to the global economy. The universities still produce great engineers. They just don't work here. The hospitals still train great doctors. They just practice in the United States. The country functions. But it's hollow, like a beautiful shell with nothing inside. That's the future of a nursery nation that never grows up. Not collapse, not chaos. Just slow, comfortable, managed decline into irrelevance. A place that used to matter, that used to punch above its weight, but chose short-term political convenience over long-term economic survival, and paid the price one immigrant at a time. 12. The final question. Who is your country actually working for? So here's the question. This video leaves hanging. When Canada spends billions educating the world's best engineers, doctors, and researchers, who actually benefits? When France subsidizes elite engineering schools that train talent for Silicon Valley, who wins? When Italy educates young people who then spend their careers paying taxes in Germany, the UK, or the United States, who is the Italian education system really serving? The answer is obvious. The destination countries win. The United States gets highly skilled workers at peak productivity without paying a cent for their education, healthcare, or upbringing. American companies get employees who cost them nothing to train. American tax authorities get decades of income tax revenue from people they never invested in. The nursery nations lose. They pay the costs. Someone else captures the returns. It's a wealth transfer, a subsidy, a quiet form of economic colonialism where the flow of value runs in one direction, from the periphery to the center, from the nurseries to the empire. And the cruelest part? It's voluntary. Nobody is forcing these people to leave. They're making rational choices based on incentives their own governments created. Low wages, unaffordable housing, starved startup ecosystems, a tax and regulatory environment that punishes risk-taking and rewards rent-seeking. The Nursery Nation trap is a trap of your own making. So the real question, the one nobody in power wants to answer, is this. Will you redesign the system so that building a life here is as rational as leaving? Will you fix wages, housing, and capital allocation so that staying makes economic sense? Or will you keep exporting your best people, calling it openness and global mobility, while wondering why your country feels rich on paper but poor in spirit? Because here's the truth. Wealth is not guaranteed. It has to obey physics, math, and incentives. And right now, the incentives say leave. The math says leave. And the physics of human capital flow says leave. Canada can change that. France can change that. Italy can change that. But it requires admitting that the current system is broken, that the social contract is a lie, that you're paying for someone else's future. And until that admission happens, the brain drain will continue. The best will keep leaving. The tax base will keep shrinking. The nurseries will keep raising children for someone else's empire. And one day, you'll wake up and realize that your country is a museum. Beautiful, historic, irrelevant. A place people visit to see what used to be, not what could be. If this helped you understand why your engineering friends all moved to Seattle, or why your taxes keep going up while services keep getting cut, share it with someone who still thinks brain drain is just a myth. It's not a myth. It's a slow-motion catastrophe. And it's happening right now. Drop a like if this hit too close to home. Subscribe for economic truths your government won't admit. And tell me in the comments, are you staying or leaving? And if you're staying, what would it take for you to change your mind? Because the Nursery Nation trap is closing, and the question is whether you'll be inside or outside when it finally snaps shut.